Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Neil here. In today's video, I wanted to tell you about what I believe to be the best hybrid camera of 2023. Now, this camera debuted in 2022, if memory serves me correctly, and I've been using it about a month or two after it was actually released. I was one of the lucky ones that was able to get my hands on it. And the camera I'm talking about is the Sony A7IV I. You probably already know about this camera. You probably already know the specs, but I'm going to tell you why I love using this camera as my A camera for video work. So this is the Sony A7IV I, and I'm sure you've seen tons of review videos on it, and that's not what I'm going to do today. I'm not going to talk about all the different technical specs. I will run down just maybe some bullet points of what I like in this camera and the reason why I use this camera on a daily basis and for most of my video projects, whether that's weddings, any sort of small business video work. I'm working on a couple of things such as a documentary, and I'll put some of that B-roll up of that doc work that I'm working on. I said work a lot. Anyways, a few of the reasons why I really love this camera is it's Sony. You know, there's a lot of different camera manufacturers out there: Canon, Sony, Fuji, Panasonic. These days, all camera models are really, really good. There's no reason why even a sub $1,000 camera, you can't get great video quality out of it. You can get 4K in most cameras these days, even 4K 60, which allows you to do slow motion if you want to do that and slow down your footage. This camera here does 4K 60, of course. It is full frame, and I find that that's the most that I'll ever have to use is 4K 60. And I really don't use it that often. I use it for my wedding work because I want to slow down the footage and make it more dramatic, more cinematic, if you will. So just some bullet points: 4K, 10-bit, 422. You can record all intra with V90 cards or Type A cards. I only use V60 cards because I can't tell that much of a difference between all intra or just your XAVC-S codec that is in here. The codecs are really great, straight out of camera. I love the fact that it does have S-Cine tone, so if you do not want to grade a lot of your footage, or you're not that great in grading, and I'm still learning myself, you can always use that and just tweak the colors a little bit. S-Cine tone is great straight out of camera. S-Log 3, S-Gamut 3, a really nice codec for color grading. It gives you good dynamic range, especially if you expose your image properly. And what I mean by expose the image is make sure out of anything and everything that you do, your white balance is set. That is going to make a drastic difference with your footage if you have everything in camera correctly set. So make sure your exposure is good. Make sure your white balance is good. Sometimes I shoot on auto white balance if it's just a running gun type of situation like a wedding, because I don't have time to fiddle with it, because I don't want to, miss any moments that are really special. But if you have the time, if you're doing talking head videos like this, corporate work, small business work, just make sure you set your white balance. Make sure your shutter, you're always following that 180-degree rule. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, since this does not have the 180 shutter on it, because technically it's not a cinema camera, make sure you're shooting 1/50th for 24 frames per second. If you're shooting 4K 60, then make sure you're shooting at least double your frame rate. So in this case, it'd be 1/125. So just, obviously the gist of the camera, the things that stick out for me is full frame. Now I'm currently recording on a Sony FX30. Love that little camera. It is a beast, but it is a crop sensor camera, which means in low light conditions, it's not necessarily the best unless you have a really fast lens. Even at that point, it's not going to be super great. So this camera is not going to be really leaps and bounds over it, but it is going to be significantly different. Why? Because you have the full frame sensor, which allows more light into the sensor. If you use it with a fast lens like the Sigma 50 1.4 Art that I have on here, that plus the dual base ISOs really help. So in this camera, the dual base ISO is 800 and 3200. I find that, basically on a sunny day, I'm going to use 800. If I have proper lighting like here, I'm going to use 800. And if I'm on a sunny day or something like that and I want to stay at 800, obviously I'm not going to crank it up to 3200 if I'm outdoors. That's the whole point of this variable ND filter here, which happens to be a Freewell variable ND mist. And I use that a lot with weddings because it just gives it a nice halation and soft image, not too soft because I do like a sharp image. So that's the main thing for me. One of the main things, excuse me, is being full frame. Again, the dual base ISO is really nice. So if you need to crank up, the exposure, at 800 or 3200, this camera is going to give you the best image quality possible. Another reason why I like this camera, I love this camera actually, is just the ergonomics. It feels so good in the hand, and my pinky, even though I have fat big hands, my pinky doesn't come off the side. Now I do have a grip on it, but the grip really doesn't add that much as far as being able to, I'm sorry, I have a cage on it. Doesn't really add that much more to the grip because I'm fitting my hands in the grip slot there. So that's why I like it. The ergonomics is absolutely great. It feels much beefier than, the previous camera, the A7 III. I had that camera for a really long time, and this one just feels a whole lot better in the hand. The grip's better. I feel like the construction is better as well. We have the flip articulating screen, which we did not have on the A7 III. And that is a huge bonus for me because that way, if I'm not running a monitor on here, I can flip this screen out and then just position it however which way I want to so I can get the best angle on my picture. And I usually leave it flipped out anyways on long days just to prevent something like overheating. I know a lot of folks have complained about overheating on the A7 IV. I have never once had an issue. Even in 90-degree weather outdoors all day filming a wedding, I've never had an issue with this overheating. I've never even gotten an overheating warning. So there are some folks out there that have had that issue. I have not. Also make sure that you're running the latest firmware update on any camera you use, especially if you are wanting the best out of the camera. Obviously the manufacturer knows what's best for the camera, so they're going to give you firmware updates to improve the performance. Battery life is also great on this camera. So like I said, typically I shoot at 4K 24 just for regular stuff. And wedding stuff, I shoot everything all day 4K 60. Even at 4K 60 all day with these NPF-Z batteries, they typically last a good amount of time. Now I don't have my camera constantly recording every minute of the day, especially with doing weddings. But if I'm just doing talking head stuff like this, it can last a good 3 hours, almost 3 hours, 3.5 hours. And during a wedding day, since I'm, starting recording, stop recording, it typically will last a good 2.5 hours, just depending on how much, I'm recording. I don't turn the camera off just in case I need to capture a moment, say on a wedding day. So I really do like the battery life of this camera as well. And as you can see in some of the B-roll that I'm inserting here of the footage that I've taken with it, it's just gorgeous. I mean, it just looks so good. And lastly, the reason why I like this camera and love this camera and love Sony cameras in general is purely because of the lens selection. The lens selection is superior to all other manufacturers. Canon won't let anyone touch the RF. Fuji has their own lenses. In my opinion, they're a little bit dated and a little bit costly for what they are. Panasonic, the L-mount Alliance, you have your Leica lenses, you have your Panasonic branded lenses. Sigma also makes lenses for Panasonic, so they have a pretty good selection in the lineup too. And so does Canon and so does Fuji. I just found them to be really expensive, and what I love is I can get a Sigma lens, a Tamron lens. I don't necessarily have to have a Sony native glass, and I feel like the performance out of Sigma and Tamron is really close to Sony glass. It may not be identical, but for me, really close, sharp, good color rendition, and price, more importantly, really matters to me. Currently, like I said, I'm filming on the FX30, and I have the Tamron 28-75 on here right now at 2.8. And I bought that lens, I really got a heck of a deal on it for 500 bucks. So that's the good thing about it, is that you can find these lenses even in the used market, or even if you buy them new, they're significantly less than the Sony native glass. And there's so many lenses to pick from. And that's really another reason why I love the Sony A7 IV. And I use it as my A camera pretty much all the time. And I use my FX30 as my B camera. So in conclusion, I feel like if you are in the market for a hybrid camera that does great video, also forgot to mention 33 megapixel stills, which will allow you to crop into an image if you need to. you will have that resolution there. If you're in the market for a camera, I would definitely check out the Sony A7IV if you can have that in your budget, because it is a fantastic camera. Even though it's over a year old, there's still so much you can do with this camera. And like I said, what I love about it is just being a full frame, battery life, 4K, 422, 10-bit, the lens selection. The price of it isn't bad at all at $24.99, and sometimes you can find them used for around $2,000 to $2,100. And the photos, excellent, just super sharp, super clean at 33 megapixels. The flip out articulating screen is great for anything that you're doing, whether you're vlogging, whether you're just trying to monitor your image, if you don't have a monitor up top. Just being able to get at different angles and low angles is a plus with having the fully articulating screen. And I know this camera's been talked about a bunch, but mainly and more importantly, for if you're doing any sort of wedding work or run and gun type of situation, you know Sony autofocus is the absolute best. That is one of the main reasons I got this camera, because although I'm trying to become a proper filmmaker, if you've seen that other video, I don't know which way the card will be. I know I need to work on getting some cinema glass and also work on manually focusing things, but sometimes in a run and gun situation, you can't really take the time to full focus yourself if you're trying to make sure your image is, formatted correctly and make sure your frame is correct. So that's another reason why I love this camera. The autofocus is just top notch, best in its class, and I feel like it is superior to other brands, especially in photo and video. So I hope you enjoyed this video today, just sharing my thoughts with you, just telling you what kind of gear I use for my video production work, why I use it, and why I think it's important to consider those things when you are looking at a camera. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any comments, leave them down below. Any questions, leave them down below. Give me your thoughts. What camera are you using? Are you using the Sony A7IV or are you using a different brand that you may think is comparable to the A7IV? I would really like to hear your thoughts. All right, guys, take care and have a good one. 너와 나 우리